Hello and welcome to Martin Fiddler Aviation's very first UK Tax Week. I am joined by the fabulous Greta Kemper and the wonderful Adrian Jones, both of whom are our specialist tax advisors. We are going to be providing 4 bite-sized chunks of tax information, starting with back to basics, then going into special procedures, then talking about common misunderstandings, and finally looking at why the UK is the best place to close a transaction. All of this will culminate in one big live interactive audience-driven session where we will be answering your most burning tax questions. So to get on to today's topic, getting back to basics, the customs rules and the VAT rules for the new UK territory. So Greta, it makes sense to start with the new UK territory, which is currently 9 months old. So can you give us some information about that?
Yes, thank you, Heather. As you explained, the new UK territory is 9 months old, started in January post-Brexit. The VAT and customs territory now for the UK includes the UK and the Isle of Man. So England, Scotland, Wales. Northern Ireland has special rules, but does not cover the Channel Islands. So for example, Guernsey and Jersey. When you bring an aircraft across the border into the new UK territory, you have to consider on what basis it's being brought in. Is it being imported into the UK? Is it going to use temporary admission? Or does it need to use one of the other special procedures, such as customs warehousing or inward processing?
Thank you very much, Greta. Now, Adrian, we all know that it's illegal to fly in an untaxed means of transport, but what does that mean for an aircraft considering their import status?
Well, any aircraft that crosses a customs frontier should be imported or entered to a customs specific regime, as Greta mentioned. So if an aircraft is imported, it will have made a declaration to the customs service in that territory in the UK, HMRC, and any taxes that are due will have been paid. So this would include customs duty and VAT, typically. In the UK, fortunately, in the UK and the EU, customs duty remains at 0% for civilian aircraft, but the VAT rate in the UK is 20%. So that poses an issue because either you're imported and you've paid that 20%, or you need to be imported and should pay that 20% VAT, or you're eligible for one of these other special customs procedures.
Great. And Adrian, if you're not already imported, is the choice binary? Is it import or temporary admission?
Yes, well, temporary admission is well known as an alternative to import, and the choice is effectively binary. There are no areas of territory which are somehow outside of customs control. So if an aircraft enters, it should either be imported already, come in for import, or be eligible for temporary admission. There are some other special procedures that we'll talk about a little later, but those are the core choices.
Great. And what are the things to think about if you do choose an import?
Well, we've already said that customs duty, which could apply to any and every goods that arrive into the UK new customs area, is at 0%. So looking at VAT then, at 20%, VAT is a business tax. It's a tax on any product that is sold or imported into a territory, and it is something which you can consider in the context of aviation, where you have an aircraft that is used for business. Now, there are certain exceptions for the VAT at 20%. Many will know that charter aircraft, if they're fully used for charter, they might have access to the 0% or exempt VAT rate. But where you have a 20% VAT rate, it's important to understand if the aircraft is used for business, and therefore whether that VAT can be somehow reclaimed, and where the aircraft is used in that business context, a VAT registration might be appropriate in order to achieve that reclaim.
Okay, thank you. And Greta, talking about reclaims, what are the key points on a VAT reclaim?
Okay. Well, as Adrian mentioned, if you have to import your aircraft, you're likely to incur VAT on that import, which, unless the VAT exemption applies, is going to be at the standard rate of 20%. And the same is true, of course, if you purchase an aircraft in the UK, you're likely to be charged UK VAT. In order to reclaim that VAT, you need a local VAT registration. And that registration needs to be applied for a VATable business, a company that is running a VATable business in the UK or including the Isle of Man. One thing that you do need to be aware of is that in the past, with a leasing structure, a lessee could actually reclaim the import VAT, didn't need to be the owner of the aircraft. A couple of years ago, HMRC have actually changed the rules so that it is now only the owner of the aircraft or the lessor who can reclaim the import VAT. Consequently, this does mean that the VAT registration needs to be applied for and the import needs to be done on behalf of the actual owner or the lessor of the aircraft. Thank
you. Adrian, talking about the Isle of Man and the UK, and the Isle of Man, of course, has the same VAT rules as the UK. Is the Isle of Man still relevant in the new UK tax territory?
Well, now you have two customs territories. You have to consider an import for the EU on the one hand and the UK as a separate consideration. The Isle of Man and the UK share the same VAT territory. Therefore, an import into the Isle of Man is just as good as an import into the UK and vice versa. You achieve the same thing. So for those aircraft that require import into UK customs territory, then the Isle of Man, yes, remains just as relevant as before. You have benefits of the Isle of Man registry, benefits of the local customs and VAT service, who are very efficient as well. And an import into the Isle of Man remains perfectly acceptable, just as good as an import into the UK in that sense.
Thank you. So we know that getting a VAT registration is not an instantaneous process. In that respect, Greta, how far in advance, if an aircraft owner is choosing to import their aircraft, how far in advance should they be looking at getting tax advice? Okay, well, this is almost something that you would work backwards for. In effect, it takes about at least 5 weeks to set up an Isle of Man company arrangement and get a VAT registration application in place and accepted with a business plan, what have you. So you need to allow for that time. We would always, to be honest, recommend that you get clear advice in advance of doing anything so that you're clear what the implications are, what the paperwork is, and what you need to provide to Isle of Man Customs to get that process as smooth as possible. Thank you. And if a full import was not the chosen route for whatever reason of the aircraft owner, what about temporary admission? Okay, temporary admission is effectively a regime that is set up to allow non-local residents to bring their aircraft in for short periods of time and use it in the territory without having to import and without having obviously to pay import VAT. But because no VAT is being paid and the aircraft isn't being imported, there are quite a lot of specific restrictions. So for example, in order to prove that the aircraft and the main user aren't local, for example, the aircraft registration must not be local. The owner of the aircraft must not be a local resident, and the aircraft needs to be used by somebody who's clearly non-locally resident.
There is also a condition that temporary admission aircraft should not be able to compete with aircraft who are imported or are locally manufactured and therefore have paid VAT. So, for example, temporary admission aircraft cannot operate commercially inside a territory charter, for example, or can't be brought in for sale.
So, I mean, in that there are certain terms that we use when we're talking about temporary admission, such as resident and user, and some of those, they can have multiple interpretations. How difficult is it to determine what a user or a resident actually is?
The key grey area that we tend to come across again and again is this idea of the non-locally resident user. So the aircraft essentially needs to be used by somebody who isn't locally resident, and user usually means the person actually sitting on the back of the aircraft directing where it's going to fly. Residency isn't specifically doesn't have a specific definition, but it can be derived from a bundle of facts. For example, somebody doesn't live in the UK, they maybe don't have a UK passport, they're not tax resident here, but can also be drawn from other facts like other connections that somebody might have to the territory. For example, family connections or business connections. So it's very important to pull together the bundle of conditions to look at whether the main user is likely to be seen as UK resident or not.
Brilliant, thank you, Greta. So, Adrian, we've mentioned a couple of times the new UK tax territory is only 9 months old. So on that, you know, the tax authorities being a bit lenient, or what are the consequences, sorry, of getting this wrong?
I think the danger is that we confuse a customs authority with a great deal to do with the new UK arrangements. We shouldn't confuse that with leniency. I think they may be very busy at the moment, but in terms of leniency, if customs rules are broken, then that potentially means a 20% VAT charge and possible penalties on top of that charge. So it's it may be that customs are not paying as much attention at the moment, but I don't think that diminishes the huge fiscal risk of a 20 or 30 or 35% overall cost for getting the importation wrong, whether the aircraft is not imported or it's breaching temporary admission rules. It's a risk. Now, I think the best advice I can give in relation to this is to get advice, but I'm a tax advisor, so maybe that's what you expect me to say.
Well, on that note, that concludes our webinar on the sort of basics of VAT and customs rules for business aviation in the new UK tax territory. Our next webinar is going to be on the 3 top special customs procedures. So that's temporary admission, customs warehousing, and inward processing relief. All of our webinars are available on our website, martinfiddler.aero. And if you have any questions, please find our contact details on the website and ask away. In the meantime, thank you very much, and we hope you'll join us for the next webinar. Bye-bye.